that deep red area. This is just one slice, and I think this is the bottom slice. This is 13.5 meters. So from there up, we have more and more slices, showing that this central void goes all the way up to the end of where this hallway or central corridor is, which is about, let's see, that one is at 6.5 meters. So you have just right here 6 meters height of this central hole in the ground void. So you're looking at 20 some, 18, if it's 6 meters, 18, 19 feet.
Hey guys, this is Mike, letusreason.com. I'm really excited to be joined by a guest today to talk about the fascinating subject of Noah's Ark. His name is Andrew Jones, and he's an American researcher who now lives in Turkey. And he's devoted his career to researching what's called the Durupinar site. And this is a boat-like formation in the mountains of Ararat that some propose to be the resting place of Noah's Ark. And he actually even runs the local visitor center there that's been constructed at the site in coordination with the local government. And so in every possible way, he's a real insider and a true expert about this subject. So Andrew, welcome, and thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and glad to share with you guys.
All right. So why don't you take a quick minute just to give us a quick introduction, a little bit of your personal background and really just who you are, completely outside of any connections with Noah's Ark, because we're going to talk about that all throughout.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the United States, mainly Montana and then California. I grew up in a Christian home, so I always believed that these stories were true. I was taught that way, and we had family worship morning and evening, and so a very religious home. Went to church every week. So in regards to my interest in archaeology, I was always interested in Bible history and anything related to the Bible. As a child, I made a genealogy chart. I thought that was great for fourth grade. It actually took me a couple years to do. And that's one way to study the Old Testament and even the New Testament, is just to make a chart of all the names. And I would read through the Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias. So I was kind of a nerd back then. Let's see what else. Well, then I went into college. I decided to go into archaeology, and my parents told me that you're not going to make any money at that, so make that your hobby and find a different career path. And so I switched and then went into computer science, and then got hired by a computer company in the United States and was working there. And that paid for my trips over to Israel and Turkey. And so my parents were right about that part. But then around the time of the pandemic, the year before, I was already going a lot to Turkey, especially in Saudi Arabia, for the research on Mount Sinai in Arabia. But what happened, I stayed too long in Turkey in 2019, and ended up basically paying a fine when I left. And so my friend said, hey, since you're staying there so much, why don't we get you a long-term visa or a longer-term visa the next year? When I came back in February, we were working on it, and that's when the pandemic hit in 2020. And my friend had already surprised me, and on his property with his family, he had a side building and built a house there for me, or a condo. And so when the pandemic hit, he said, why don't you stay here? We could do the Noah's Ark research. You don't know how long the borders will be closed. And it's a good, Turkey's a good base from, I was doing tours also, and traveling a lot to Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Israel. And so I decided to do that. And so since 2020, I've been living in the Middle East. So half the year I'm in Turkey, and the other half I'm in other countries doing this research.
Wow, that's exciting. I've never lived anywhere except the actual state and the town that I live in right now. So our
Oh, wow.
paths have been completely different. Yeah, I've been in the same town my whole life, if you can believe that. So I've
But you've
traveled a little
traveled,
bit,
right?
but a
Okay,
little bit. Been to Europe, been to the
that's good.
Caribbean, but I would love to go to Israel. Would love to go to the Middle East. Hopefully it's going to become a little bit safer to do that, because there's some incredible things to see out there, even in Turkey,
Yeah.
where you're at. But
A lot of
hey,
biblical sites. Yeah.
oh yeah, completely. Now, as we get started, one of the things that I wanted to address first, and maybe you can just talk about this for a little bit, is the whole Ron Wyatt connection to the Durupinar site. We're going to be talking about the Durupinar site today in Turkey. Now, a lot of people have heard about Ron and his claimed discoveries, things like not only the Durupinar site, but also things like chariot wheels in the Gulf of Aqaba at Nueva Beach, which is the possible, or I actually think probable site of the Red Sea crossing. But even
Yeah.
things like the Ark of the Covenant that he claimed to have found
Yeah.
in caves underneath Golgotha in Jerusalem, and some pretty interesting claims that he made about angels being under there, him having a interaction with angels, and that the Israeli government now has control of it. But because a lot of those claims were sort of without too much evidence, he's taken sort of a lot of criticism by some people. And so, because the Durupinar site is also associated with him, there at one time was a lot of opposition to it. I think that seems to be maybe diminishing a little bit as more and more evidence comes out. But can you quickly just comment on Ron Wyatt and who he was, a little bit of that, your interactions with him? Did you know him? And whether or not you think he actually deserves so much criticism by some people?
Yeah. So when I first heard of Ron, I was in middle school. So I think it was seventh grade or eighth grade. This was 1991, I think it was. What happened? He had come out to California. It was a Thursday night, so it was a school night, and in our church bulletin or newsletter, it said that this guy was coming out to do a presentation about all these sites. Mount Sinai in Arabia, the Red Sea crossing, Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah's Ark. I don't know if I mentioned the Ark of the Covenant, but because it was a school night and I was really focused on getting good grades, I asked my father to go down and come back and report back to me, and he was willing to do that. So he went down there, listened to the meeting. It was just a one night meeting with Ron, telling I guess all his discoveries. And so when he came back, my dad said, I remember he said, "Well, this one man said he found everything." And so I was intrigued. So I looked his name up and saw that he had a book, or my dad told me he had a book published. So I went and bought it. It was actually at the local bookstore they had it. It was called Discover Noah's Ark. And it was a small paperback, and it had all his discoveries in there, but just very short text about each one and some photographs, black and white. And so I knew I had to contact him. It was like, wow, there's a lot of claims. Again, seventh or eighth grade, was interested in archaeology and Bible history. And so this is before the internet. So back then you had to call 411. And I got the operator on the phone, and I asked her, I said, I need to get connected. Do you have a phone number for a Ronald Eldon Wyatt? His full name was in the cover of the book, and it said Madison, Tennessee. And they said, sure. And they connected me through, and he actually picked up. And so I was surprised and stuttering around. And then he said, why don't you call me back tomorrow? I just got home from the Middle East. I said, oh, okay. And so I called him back the next day, and I remember talking to him on the phone for, I think the first phone call was 2 hours. And I was taking a lot of notes, just writing out on the notebook pad. And then later I decided, and then I called him back again that same week for another 2 hour phone call. Then he got suspicious. And at first I was wondering why he would be so paranoid, but now I understand based on how people had interacted with him, people he had trusted who claimed he was an Israeli spy. That's why he was jailed in Saudi Arabia, for example. There was a friend who said that, so-called friend. Things like that. And I heard later from stories where people would call I guess back then, there's not much security. You could call up and say that you're this person on the phone and get your plane tickets canceled. So when people found out he's going overseas, they'd do that type of a mean trick or prank, this awful thing. So he was very suspicious. So when I was asking very detailed questions, I'm just this kid, 13, 14-year-old. He then he stopped answering. He said, well, I'll answer in general terms, but I'm not answering any more detailed questions. I was like, well, that's strange. But then later, I kept calling back. And I would bother him and his family. And they said I was the most persistent person researching this. But and that was for the first from the early 90s until 95. That's how I interacted with him, just calling him up. I'd call people who was involved. I found out David Fausel's phone number, and he was a co-worker for a little bit with Ron on the Durupinar site. And he also went to the Mount Sinai site with Ron on his second trip in 1985. He happened to be there in Turkey when the Saudi businessman or local prince, whoever he was, invited Ron to legally come back the next year. Fazl was there in Turkey on his first trip to see the Durupinar site, and so he got invited too. And so I talked to Fazl a lot. Now he lived in California, so it was the time difference wasn't there. Plus this was before unlimited minutes, so I could talk to Fazl a lot and not get in trouble for my parents for the big long distance phone bills. Um, so then in '95, Ron came out. We invited him to have some meetings over the weekend in Sacramento. And then in '96, he came out again. We had him twice out there. And then finally in '97, I went out to the Durupinar site. A friend of mine who was on one of Ron's early '90s tours didn't get to see it because the Turkish government said there was a security issue and a busload of Americans would be a target for terrorists. And so the tour was stopped 4 hours from the site. They were driving in. And so this friend who didn't get to see the Ark, he finally wanted to see it in 1997. And he invited me to come along as his travel companion. So that was my first time out there, first time traveling by myself to Turkey. So it was I had so many funny stories. And again, very paranoid because at first my friend did not tell Ron because he said, well, Ron, he didn't really like how what happened on that first tour. And so he said, I'm just going to go over there because Ron's going to tell us not to go. I finally told Ron, and he told me, tell Bill, this is Bill Fry, who sadly passed away too. But he said, tell Bill to call me right now. And so I told Bill, and in the end, it turned out for the best because Ron gave us a lot of tips. He gave us some money to give to the guy taking care of the visitor center, Hassan, and also printed posters. So we brought a whole tube of posters we put up on the wall of this visitor center that was built in 1987, overlooking the Durupinar site. And so, but from all my interactions with Ron, and twice in person at meetings and just on the phone a lot, or talking to people he worked with, even those who didn't believe in Ron's sites. The one thing I noticed about Ron, especially I remember he was eating at our house right before the meeting, and everyone, it's like a potluck. So everyone's talking about any type of topic, sports, politics, whatever. He was quiet, but when the topic of the Bible or witnessing to someone or salvation or archaeology came up, he would pipe up. And you could tell that was his main goal in life and interest. Was this topic, and now that doesn't mean he found anything, but from just him personally, he was very humble, very meek. It was not about himself. He doesn't beat his chest, say, well, I found this, so I'm the best, whatever. It was, he believed God had led him, and that's the only reason why he had went to these sites and God protected him. And so he was very humble about that. Now, in regard to the criticism, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so you didn't get the feeling that he's a guy who tended towards sensationalism or trying to get the spotlight or trying to make money or anything like that?
Definitely not the money, and no, because the way his attitude was about the sites, it was not about himself or trying to make him promote his name.
Gotcha.
So then it'll come down to well, could he have misinterpreted data? There's some things in the research for Noah's Ark, even not Sodom and Gomorrah, but Mount Sinai, where you can see he changed his opinion as he got more data. It wasn't some people, even today, he passed away in 1999, and I see this where there's kind of extremes where you throw everything out because it has Ron's name, or those who put him on a pedestal and he's like a prophet or something. For me, it was never that. It was more about the evidence, and because I talked to people who worked with him, and it wasn't just about Ron, like Fazl, and I wrote letters to other people like Dr. Bill Shea. I didn't see him trying to self-promote. Definitely not about money. So that does come down though. Did he misinterpret data on some things? And I'm seeing that for the Noah's Ark site. Either he didn't have all the data, or he misinterpreted a couple things. It doesn't change the evidence in my mind that this is Noah's Ark, but some of these side things that were associated around it, or sites nearby that he was saying was associated with Noah's Ark that didn't turn out to be what he thought they were. And I don't actually bring it up in my presentation, but I did do a talk about one of the things. There's a Noah's Ark symposium held at the local university every 2 years in Turkey. And so for the last 2 or 3 times I presented there. and then so the next one's actually coming up this year. And so this last time, 2023, I did present a paper about one of the claims that didn't turn out. I go where the data goes, and we have more data too now. And I actually, in this presentation, I do talk a little bit about where Ron thought was the bottom of the hull of this boat formation, so the bottom of the boat. That turned out to be maybe the middle deck. Like we're having more preserved data shown below the ground, more preserved structure, deeper. So Ron's design of the boat that he thought how it was reconstructed, it probably is wrong. But I don't see it as malicious, like, oh, he did it on purpose, or like he's making up data. No, the site's there. You can measure it. I'll talk about like what he did on the site. Now the site's not called the Ron Wyatt site. It's called the Durupinar site because he, like some people want to say, oh, he claimed he found all this stuff. This site was already discovered, and we'll find. I'll explain it in the presentation. But he came later, and it was kind of written off by the time he showed up in the late 70s. And then he started doing research. It wasn't just like he showed up and said, hey, I found Noah's Ark. That's not what he did. And so he was actually trying to do soil tests, trying to do this, GPR, the radar thing. And so and then that made him convinced that it was the Ark. And so it does, I think it would come down to the way he, he's not the traditional archaeologist will take you 20 years to come to a conclusion, write a book. He was more willing to say something like he'll see it one day and say, well, this fits what I think it is, so I'm going to say it's this, or do one initial test. And so you can criticize him for that, but you can't say that he was like planting evidence or making up things that didn't exist. About Noah's Ark. Now, I don't know about the Ark of the Covenant. I've never seen the Ark, so I don't know if his story is true. I've been a lot to the Red Sea crossing site and Mount Sinai. I do presentations on that. I also do tours across Egypt and Saudi Arabia. I've been to Saudi many, many times, and I'm actually going to Egypt next week to lead our next tour. We followed that route that he's proposed.
Has Saudi Arabia opened up that site now for tourists?
Yeah. They started, it was opened in 2019. So a lot of people don't know that. And so you can actually go there and see these sites, the Big Split Rock, climb the mountain, go to the cave, Cave of Elijah, see the cow petroglyphs on the rock face there, the Golden Calf altar site. You can go to the Red Sea crossing. So those sites are there. And for me, I really love studying that because it's all about logic, like how and where could the Israelites go? And so for me, that site makes the most sense versus St. Catherine's Monastery area, the traditional Jebel Musa or Mountain of Moses in Egypt. And so it comes down to, it's not like Ron, you can say he misinterpreted data here and there, but some of the critics want to throw the whole thing out because Ron's name is attached. And I think, for example, the Noah's Ark site, you're getting more and more interest. It doesn't mean everyone's accepting everything about it. There's more studies need to be done. But like Mount Sinai, you're getting a lot more scholars accepting that. It's still a minority view, but there's not really like what do you call it? Like a document saying like all the scholars say this is Mount Sinai, so that's it. You have like, for example, not a half a dozen. You probably have a dozen or 18 different claimed Mount Sinai sites. But there's getting more and more interest in the Sinai being in Arabia. So you do have these scholars kind of shifting, not because of Ron, but people are looking at the data and on their own coming to these conclusions. They're studying it. And not just saying, oh, I watched a Ron Wyatt video, so now I believe it. No, they're actually going out there studying it, researching it. And so at least those two sites people's opinions are changing, especially Mount Sinai. But Ark of the Covenant.
And then the difference also is that those sites and, this site, Durupinar, it's a site. It's something you can go to and you can test it. It's an actual thing. It's not like you have to take his word for anything. I mean, you think he's wrong. Okay, go there and do the testing and let the test results show whether he was right or wrong.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
So speaking of which, I was going to say, I know you have a lot of data that you're going to share with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and bring your slideshow right up here. And, you can take it away and just take us through some of the information as you see fit. But if you wanted to add something on, I feel like I interrupted you. You can add that on too.
No, no, let's jump right into it. That's what we're here for. And I do have a lot of slides. I don't know if we'll get through them all, or I'll skip some. A lot of them will just like show the picture, a couple seconds go on. Others will talk about stuff. And I added more than what I sent you earlier. So this is actually an expanded version versus what I showed in Zurich here in Switzerland a couple weeks ago to a German church. So this has some new stuff versus what we have presented on the internet because we're always gathering more information, and there's stuff we're still researching that we haven't fully presented yet. Anyway, so I just want to start in about the topic of the search for Noah's Ark. Um, I'm gonna go through these first one really quick. It's for those watching it. The topic of Noah and the flood is popular. It's even Hollywood has made movies, and you were just mentioning earlier about this movie that had the rock monsters, and this Hollywood's version is usually different from what the Bible says, or they make it a little more fantastic, like monsters and such. So who knows? But this is a screenshot from the film. And here in Europe, where I'm at, there you can go to Denmark. I believe it's Denmark. Yes. No, not Denmark. Netherlands. Dutch. You can go to Netherlands, and they have a replica of Noah's Ark. Not a full scale, but very close. What was kind of funny about this site, it's actually a floating replica, is that they had a storm come through, and the police or the firemen had to rescue them, the tourists, off the boat because it was taken on water or something during the storm. And so obviously that's not the real Ark, but that was kind of funny. Of course, the famous sites, if you live in the United States, is the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, run by Answers in Genesis. And I
Yeah,
visited this one.
I've
And this
not
is,
been there, but it's definitely
oh,
something I
you
want
need
to
to
do.
go.
And they have the Creation Museum down there too, right?
Yes, nearby. It's a separate. It's in Cincinnati. I forget where. But it's a separate
They're
property,
like
but run by the
45
same
minutes away
group.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I heard, and I was last there in 2018, and I heard they've added a lot more. But like they're building a replica of the Herod's Temple or something like. There's a lot of biblical stuff they're putting into the theme park, so it's really awesome. Now it's like the largest wooden structure on the earth, they claim right now, and it's almost the same size as the Durupinar site. And they say they took an average for the cubit because it's a short and long, but their cubit's very close to what the Royal Egyptian cubit is, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But I've been inside the different layers, the levels, and the have cages. It's awesome. A very big object. But Europe and America is not the only people with an Ark. You can go to Asia, and Hong Kong has a replica. I don't know how large this is. It says 450 feet. I guess that's right. But a friend of mine actually went there, and I don't. These are not his photos, but he went there last year, and I haven't updated my slides. But it's quite amazing in there. In fact, they have in this replica a five-star restaurant and hotel. And so I don't think Noah had it that good on the Ark, but it's a hotel for tourists. And a couple of years ago, it was actually over a decade ago in 2014. One of the curators for the British Museum, Irving Finkel, he claimed that he had interpreted this tablet from Iraq, from Sumeria or Babylon, and that it had the story of Noah's Ark. And he believed that the word they used describes this traditional boat that's a circular boat that they would use in the marsh areas in Mesopotamia. And so one of the British tabloid news drew up a diagram of, you can see a giraffe sticking his head out, the size of it compared to the British tour buses. I don't think the Ark was a round circular saucer. You can see them throwing up as it's twirling around in a storm. But this guy, he has a PhD. He believed this was what the Ark was shaped like.
Well, the Bible
There it
tells us
has.
the width, no?
Yeah, the Bible gives us three dimensions, very brief, and so it does describe more of a traditional ship, I believe, versus what he thinks. Because again, he's taking his information from outside the Bible,
Hmm.
from those tablets, and so he thinks that's a better source, and I disagree with that. Um, but there have been studies, for example, this one where it was published in the Journal of Physics, 2013, and they were surprised that their studies showed that the boat could float. And using the weight of a sheep, they say you could fit an average of 2 million sheep on the boat if they were about that size of animal, and it was buoyant. So they were surprised at that. Now we're getting into the Bible story. So in the Bible, it's only briefly mentioned in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, where Noah's Ark is to be found. And it's not the GPS location. It's not even a specific peak. It says the mountains of Ararat. Now, if I were to tell you today and use this, it'd be like me saying Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Colorado or the mountains of Canada. So Ararat was a country, and so the English word Ararat comes from the ancient word Urartu, and that was the kingdom in eastern Turkey, part of northern Iran, and into Armenia, and especially during the Iron Age, where they had its greatest extent. But during the time of Moses, it must have been a very small kingdom. But Moses said, "In the mountains of this kingdom, the ark landed." So he's not referring to a specific peak, but somewhere in that territory. And so we're looking at this. For those who know Turkish geography, the far eastern area was this kingdom of Urat or Ararat, so Urartu. And so there's archaeological sites all through that kingdom, and it's a very mountainous area. So a lot of the sites are ancient castles and fortresses built on the mountains, mountaintops. And so I've been to a number of them. And if you go on our tour, we take you to the Von Museum there by Lake Von, and that's the capital city of this kingdom of Ararat. And the museum has a lot of artifacts, a really well done regional museum there. And of course, the tallest mountain in that area, though, is Ararat, as the Turkish name, Mount Ararat. And so here's a view of it from the north side, from Armenia. The mountain's fully in Turkey, but it's really close to Iran and Armenia. And so it has a lot of ancient history around this mountain. Now, in 2017, I went to Armenia with a friend. I wanted to see some of the ancient sites there. And we went to this cave that the U.S. government helped sponsored with excavations and preservation. And it turned out to be, at the time, what they claimed was the oldest winery in the world. Now, a couple years later, I believe Georgia, the country of Georgia, nearby, said they found the oldest winery. But at any rate, in this area of the world, they're finding things like the oldest winery, which brings up, or, reminds you of the story of Noah getting drunk and growing grapes after the flood. But in that cave system, they also found what they say is the oldest shoe, and it's well preserved, and it's now on display in Yerevan, the capital city of the National Archaeological Museum of Armenia. And it's a moccasin-like shoe. They say it's 5,500 years old. So you can just say right after the flood. Who knows? Maybe one of Noah's grandchildren wore that shoe. So this is around the mountain. This is the Turkish name there, Ararat, which means the mountain of pain. Now, Mount Ararat didn't get that name until around 425 AD. So before that, we'll go over some of the ancient historians and their stories about the Ark, but they just said the mountains of the Kurds, or they called it, or the mountains of Ararat. It wasn't exactly a one peak. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and of course Armenia also converted to Christianity before that, some of these sites, they started picking out names and applying them with no evidence. But so because it's the tallest peak, they said, oh, that has to be it. This is before any geological studies were done. Now, when you do the studies, though, you'll find out that Mount Ararat's actually what's called a stratovolcano. So there's different types of volcanoes. A strato or composite volcano is basically a mountain or volcano that's built up by different eruptions. And so it forms a cone-like shape. And here's a little animation showing how after each eruption, you get one layer, and then that's why it's called a composite, because it's a composite of different layers. And then you'll have it sitting there for a while, then another eruption will build it up higher. And there's some famous stratovolcanoes around the world. One is Mount Taranaki in New Zealand. You can see that cone-like shape of the mountain. And then here's the same view of the mountain of Mount Taranaki on that left side. But then the top right corner, if you've been to the northwest, that's Mount Rainier in Washington. That's a stratovolcano. And then the bottom one is Mount Fuji in Japan, another famous mountain. And right now in the news, if you've seen it, Mount Etna in Italy is a stratovolcano, and it's erupting. And I actually, on our YouTube channel, made a little video because the lava is slowly flowing down the mountain, and it's encapsulating trees and melting the snow. but it's going really slow that the tourists are allowed up there, and you can get right, pretty close and get pictures or drone shots of it. And that's a stratovolcano. So these different eruptions are building up the mountain. So then I'm just going to show you some pictures of Ararat. So again, this is a volcano. Now it hasn't erupted since 1840, but you can see the cone shape. Now there's some smaller cones to the east. They call it Lesser Ararat, and even some very small ones nearby. But all that, the base, the whole mountain is lava, dried lava beds. This is a volcano. And here's a NASA photo, satellite photo, and the red arrow is pointing out some of those huge lava flows that have flowed down in the past. And it was all around the mountain. Now, so this photo was taken actually from the Durupinar site, which is across the valley. Very beautiful area of the world, very dramatic scenery. It's great for geologists. You have all sorts of things going on in that area, from fault lines to volcanoes. And so you can see these like 100 to 200-foot high or thick, lava beds that are down there. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the last eruption was in 1840, and it was not just an eruption but an earthquake, and it created the Ahora Gorge on the north side there, where the arrow is pointing. And that just blew out the side of the mountain. It killed over 1,000 people, destroyed a famous Armenian monastery that was up there on the side of Mount Ararat. And yet, and then here's Mount St. Helens, which had the same type of action where the side of the mountain was blowing up. This is again Mount St. Helens. But this 1840 eruption that's been studied, it basically created this mud flow that came down and buried a lot of villages. Now, sadly, there are people who in the past have claimed that Noah's Ark, they've seen parts of it in the Ahora Gorge, like this newly created canyon system from 1840. Suddenly now Noah's Ark is in there. Of course, the most famous sighting, if we're going to talk about like what are the sightings of Noah's Ark on this Mount Ararat, is the Hagopian story. Now, he was an Armenian who lived as a child near Lake Von, I think in Von. He was a shepherd. And he claimed that one hot summer, him and his uncle took the sheep from Bonn to Mount Ararat. And his uncle had climbed the mountain, and his uncle showed him Noah's Ark and put him up on it. And this is how he described it. So Alfred Lee, an artist, interviewed him in the late 70s, I believe, before he passed away. And Hagopian described what he saw, and Alfred Lee drew it. And so it was this famous barred shape. Perfectly preserved too. It wasn't broken up or anything, and that's what he said he saw in the early 1900s. So about a little over 100 years ago.
So that could not have any connection to the Durupinar site, right?
No. This is up. This is all the so-called sightings on the traditional Mount Ararat across the valley on the volcano.
So it's either or. It can't be if Durupinar is correct.
There's no way you can go from one to the other or somehow within 100 years move it.
Yeah,
it's either or. So, you could spend a whole time talking about like one thing against his story, for example, maybe as a kid, his uncle put him up on a rock and said, imagine the Noah's Ark story. So now the guy's 80 something years old. He's being interviewed on his deathbed, and he's remembering things and claiming he saw that wasn't reality. I don't want to call him a liar, but the thing is, Armenian shepherd, like even today, shepherds in the area, they don't take their sheep from Von, which is a 2.5-hour drive from Mount Ararat. They don't take sheep that far. So they don't go from there all the way over to Ararat, then climb the mountain. So the locals, their sheep are in that different regions. And they'll move them around for the better grass and all that, but not a 2.5-hour drive type of thing. So that story doesn't make any sense. And there's no one's ever seen this thing since. And I'll talk more about the mountain in a second. But the other claim that got an initial interest, but then they realized this a natural ridge feature was they called the Ararat anomaly. So now you have spy satellites and Google images taking pictures of the mountain, and people seeing shapes up there. It's like, oh, maybe this is it, maybe that is it. And then one of the studies done was on the glacier, and so since they started taking pictures of Ararat in the 70s until now, they can measure the glacier extent, and it's actually lost 30% of its size. You can call it global warming, whatever you want to call it, but it's shrinking. So now you have less and less places for the Ark to hide. So in the past, and I did my first presentation at the Noah's Ark Symposium back in 2019 or 20. I think it was 20 because during the pandemic, it was an online event that year. And it was about the using technology and looking for Noah's Ark. So in the past, you could, this was a very remote area, Eastern Turkey. And so, like, a couple hundred years ago, this is the Ottoman Empire. And when you have Westerners coming through, Christians, and they see the Mount Ararat, they either going to try to climb it or they'll hear stories or, people maybe get delusional. But when someone comes back and said, I saw Noah's Ark somewhere on the mountain, what can you do? You'll spread it around the churches, people put it in their newsletter, write a book, but there's no way to validate or verify what they said. And so when you had different people saying, oh, I saw the Ark up there, there's all these different locations. None of them are in one single spot or one side of the mountain. They're all scattered around different elevations, different sides. And so that's why we're like, okay, and we'll get more into other reasons why the Ark could not have landed up there. But the eyewitness accounts don't match. And so now you have a lot of trekking, sporting type events on the mountain. People can go. It's open to tourism now. The last I don't know, was it 2020 or 21 and before that people could go up with special permits, but now it's very easy. There's like a lot of Europeans and even Americans go there, 20, 30 people in the group. And that's just one group. And each season you have all these different companies, locals who have these tourism companies taking tourists. It's not a technical climb. So you don't need it, like, it's not like Everest. You just need to be in shape and you can go up there. So you have a lot of people now climbing the mountain and no one has come back saying, hey, we found the Ark. In the past, you could have one guy go and say, oh, yep, I saw it. And then the churches, the Christian world will be like, oh, wow, there's proof. The Ark is up there. Now you have Google Satellite. You have all of this technology and you have all these tourists climbing around the mountain. So no one can really make a claim, yet people try and still do it. That you cannot investigate. Like now it's easy to investigate someone's claim. So, just looking from the claims of the Ark on Ararat, and the reason why I talk about it a lot is because that's the main mountain people say the Ark is on. And so when you look at the Durupinar site, which is 17 miles south, so the initial reaction is, oh no, that can't be Noah's Ark because all the eyewitnesses say it's up there. And that has to be Mount, the Bible. And then some people misquote the Bible and say, well, Genesis says the Ark landed on Mount Ararat. And I always have to correct them, say, no, it says the mountains of Urartu, this, it's the mountainous area of this kingdom. And so up till probably the 90s, a lot of the Christian world was focused in on Ararat. Ron Wyatt, Durupinar, some of these other people looking at other sites, they were either attacked or criticized or just ignored. Then people started studying the geology of the area, creationist. So now you have answers in Genesis. You go to their website, they'll say, no, the Ark is not on Ararat. Ararat is a post-flood stratovolcano. And that's why I talked about stratovolcanoes before, is because there's a problem. If you have the Ark on the last erupted layer, the outside of this stratovolcano, you're basically saying that the mountain was already formed. So when the flood waters came down, the Ark landed on the outside layer of this mountain that's already there. It's not true because stratovolcano, like Ararat, is a post-flood, meaning after the flood volcano. How do we know that? Well, because of core drilling, they know that the mountain itself is on flood deposits. So there's all this marine layers below, thousands of feet down. I don't know, but I mean it's deep. They've cored, and so this mountain itself was formed on layers that the flood itself laid down, and the mountain lava that I've shown all these photographs to you of. It's not a pillow lava like you see in Hawaii, meaning it's not fresh lava that formed underwater. There's no pillow lava on Ararat, and all those lava beds at the base, it's not pillow lava. So this type of lava is erupting above water on regular ground. So that, again, that's why Dr. Andrew Snelling, who's against the Durupinar site, but he has good data, summarizing the geology of why Ararat is not a good site for a Noah's Ark. It's because of this geological data that the mountain was formed later. And so, but up till the 90s, books and making films, here's a guy from France, Fernando Navarro, and he believed that the Ark was in the glacier and he had found wood up there. So that became famous I think it was in the 60s he did that. And then this film that would go around the churches, it was made by the two authors on the book on the right, Charles and David. And then they produced another film in the 90s kind of like an update. And so these films were kind of like a summary view of why the Ark is on Ararat and all the eyewitness accounts. And um, yeah, so the most famous, though, that as you can say, the most recent about the Ark on Ararat is called the Nami site. Nami is the Christian group out of Hong Kong, so the Chinese Christians who met up with a local guide who used, and I think he still does. He's older now, but he would take people up the mountain, so he knew the mountain really well. And he claimed he had found Noah's Ark, but he said he wouldn't show this group unless they paid him. So it's a business transaction. Now we don't know the details, but the rumors that go around that town at the base of Do Zet, where I live, that's like the base town at the bottom of the mountain. So if you go on our tours, that's where the hotel is, like 30 minutes from the Durupinar site. And so in this town, you have a lot of guides. But everyone says this man made about $1 million off the Chinese. And I can see why that's true, because this was 2009, 2010. They made the initial announcement that they had found this wooden structure in the ice on the south side of the mountain. So now, so it's a different site than other claims. It doesn't match the other eyewitness accounts, but they're saying now it's 2/3 up on the south side, the mountain where the town of Do Zet is. And he took them up there. So in 2014, about 4 years after the initial hype, I got an email from someone who said they would like to show me photos of the site. I was like, oh, wow. And so we did a Skype. And so that summer in 2014, he showed me pictures. The year before in October, he went up there. Like the same guy to one of the guy's associates took this guy in. There's a little hole in the ground, and I could never done it because I'm claustrophobic. But and the mountain's moving, so you're kind of almost in an area where there's a lot of rock slides and everything, especially in the hot summer. But if you go in October, things are frozen in place, and that's usually when they take people to show their site. But you go down this crack and hole in the ground, and then you come into this area where you see wood, like panels, and you don't see a whole big floor or a hallway. You just see like these wood sections. And he went there and he showed me all these pictures. And I asked him, well, how did you get in there? And he said, well, I had to pay the guy. So how much did he charge you? $25,000 to go see this wood planted, in the hole. And so you can see there's the locals are making money off the Christian interest in this search. Meanwhile, you could pay like, $50 a taxi and drive 30 minutes to the Durupinar site. And you can, and if the local will let you, my friend Nuri, you can walk down to it to go through his field and then walk on it. You don't need to pay anyone $25,000 to see the site we're going to talk about. It should get going. We're still not there to talk about the evidence for our site, but I want to summarize this view about the Ark on Ararat. I think the title of Mary Irwin's book. Now, her husband walked in the moon. He was a creationist, Jim Irwin, the astronaut, and he was looking for Noah's Ark. He knew Ron Wyatt. Ron said he was a friend of his. Now, Jim was more interested in the Ark on Ararat. But when he passed away, his wife wrote a book about this, like summarizing the whole search of the Ark on Ararat. And the title says it all: the unsolved mystery of Noah's Ark, because there's never been found like this proof of this vessel, especially a whole vessel that's broken in two or not broken at all, like Hagopian said, on that volcano. But is there any data that would show us that the Ark would even exist up to today? And I get this on my YouTube videos. People leaving comments saying, why are you even looking for the Ark? It doesn't even exist anymore if there was an Ark. Like Noah would have made his houses and they would have torn the Ark apart for firewood or whatever, after the flood. Well, we can easily disprove that. If you look at the ancient historians, and starting with Berosus, a Chaldean or Babylonian historian in 257 BC, he mentions that the Ark still existed during his time, and that people could go there like tourists, like we do, and they could take pieces of the wood or bitumen off the Ark. And even up to 50 AD, so right after Christ's crucifixion, you had here's a historian or a church, I don't know who it actually is, Nicholas of Damascus. And maybe he was a historian, but anyways, in his works, he talks about the boat existing still. Then we have Josephus, the famous Jewish historian, again, right after the time of Christ, and he quotes a lot of these other historians, but he mentions that the Ark exists on this mountain and people were going to see it. So up to the start of the Christian era, you have people, the Ark was around, like in some type of shape. We don't know how preserved it was, but people could see it. It was not all used up by Noah and his sons. And then even up into the the later the third 300s AD, fourth century, you have Christian officials. Here's a bishop talking about it, and so. The Ark, I believe, existed even up until the Middle Ages before it kind of got forgotten, buried, or decayed further away until this site that showed up in the news in 1959. And so this is the
So
one we are.
all of those quotes referred to
Yeah.
Armenia. So were the borders different back then, or because we're saying this is in Turkey now?
Yeah, so the current borders of, like, for example, the country of Turkey, this was all defined right after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, after World War One. So World War One, the Ottoman Turks were on the wrong side of the war. They sided with Germany. So when the Germans lost, and then they had basically almost like a civil war in the Ottoman Empire. Remember also Lawrence of Arabia. They made a movie about that. He helped the Arabs get away from the Ottoman Turks, and so they can form their
Mhm.
own countries. So the Ottoman Empire fell apart, and then they have this war. And so on the eastern side of the empire, there was fighting going on, and so the current border now that you see, which is in Turkey, the whole mountain itself is in Turkey, but right on the other side, the north side of the mountain, right in the valley, is a river. I forget the name of the river, but that's the international border now. So on the other side of that river is Armenia, which is now just a small little country. But when, like, the area we're in, there's a lot of the locals will tell you they even have their, like, DNA or ethnic um, relations to the Armenians. They'll tell you stories about Armenians living there. You can see the cemeteries of the Armenians with the crosses on it, broken down churches. In fact, on our tour to, like, Van, there's a famous Armenian church on the island, Akdamar, and we take a ferry boat out to it. It's well preserved Christian church, Armenian church, but there's no, it's a museum now. There's no one worshiping there, and most of them, there's hardly any Armenians left in that area of Turkey. So yes, though these quotes, I can go back to one of them. Let's see. They'll call, like, here they call it the country of the Kurds. Some of this might just be how at that time, the border is shifting around, or the ethnic groups in there. Like, the Kurds, they come from the they say the Medes, the Medes and Persian Empire, and the Medes lived up in the mountains.
Yeah,
And
like
so
northern
the
Iran, right?
North Iran, North Iraq. So the Medes, they basically come where the Kurds came from, and so the Kurds lived in these mountains area. And so the person writing these stories at the time, they used the names of what they thought whoever was living there at the time they wrote. Like, this was 300s AD. Go back over here. Now I don't know what is the actual Greek or Hebrew word like Josephus used, but in the English they've translated it to Armenia.
Hmm.
So again,
But
maybe
if
it
you
is
go back one slide previous, I think, maybe one more
Armenia,
before
Great
that.
Mountain Armenia, Nicholas. This one is
So the one
Armenia
that mentioned the
again.
Gordaeans, yeah, the mountains of the
Yeah,
Gordaeans. Do we know what that is? And would that
there's many
correspond
theory.
to the
No,
Durupinar site?
well, no, because we don't know the full extent of the Guardians or where they are. Some try to put it in southern Turkey, closer to where the Quran says, Mount Judy. And so there's actually, so now that the Ararat site's kind of been disproved by most people because of the geology, so you have people now looking elsewhere. I don't have a slide about it, but there's a graphic. You look on ICR, Institute of Creation Research website. They have a paper they published where one guy was saying, yes, they agree. Like, they reference Andrew Snelling's article about Ararat being a post-flood volcano. So now they're looking at, okay, where in the area of Ararat can you look for Noah's Ark that's not volcanic? And so they found this mountain ridge that goes from the west, from Ararat out. And I forget the name of the ridge, but it's made up of sedimentary rock. So the flood laid it down, and they believe that at a certain level, I don't know if it's the Cretaceous period. They're naming these different geological layers. They say, okay, this is where the flood water started to recede. So any mountains with this type of rock layers, this would be a good candidate to look for where the Ark would land. And so there's this western ridge that goes out past the Ark and past Ararat. And so they propose in this paper that would be a good mountain range to look for the Ark. Now, the funny thing is that you can take that same paper, and there are other papers talking about, it's a big research going on in the creationism about the geological column and where the flood actually started and stopped. And so there's two different views, and I don't want to get technical. Plus, I don't know all the nuances of it. But basically, there's a certain layer where they're saying, okay, this is where the flood water went to its maximum extent. It was laying down these layers. And after that, the water started going down. So using their logic, they picked out this mountain range, this author for ICR. Well, that same evidence is at the Durupinar site. And I'll show you one of the diagrams. Like the Durupinar site itself is built up on limestone, different layers from the Cretaceous period, using traditional terms. So this is not a volcano where the Ark is at, what I call the Ark, the Durupinar shape, boat shape. So their evidence fits perfectly for a non-volcanic site area where we're at doing research at the Durupinar site. But in regards to this, no, there's not a, like if you look at the book of Genesis, it says Ur-2. Now we know during the Iron Age, like the time of King David and such, and later, the kingdom of Ur-2, at a great extent, included a lot of areas up to Armenia and to Iran. Down, I don't know how far south they got, whether they included Mount Judy, but that's where when Moses wrote it, he said it was in our Ur-2 mountains. That's the biblical evidence. Other historians writing later, non-inspired, they're using different names that we don't know exactly where, like how to apply it to the territory of Ur-2. So that's why I have people, when we talk about, for example, the Tower of Babel, they try to point, because of that verse in Genesis 9 or 10, talking about the Tower of Babel, how they went east and went to the plain of Shinar, and that's the start of the tower. So when they're going east from the Noah's Ark area, that's where everyone started, they say, well, if Shinar is Mesopotamia, if you're going east, that means you started, if you're coming from the east, going west, that means you started in Iran. And so, I get comments on my YouTube videos of people trying to promote an Iranian, like way down, this is way south, view for the landing of Noah's Ark. But I always point them back to that verse that actually talks about the landing, Genesis 8:4, which says it was in the mountains of Ur-2, and there's zero evidence for Ur-2 being down there in Iran. All the archaeological sites and everything about it, it's up there north. So same with like this, the mountain, it says, at the start of that quote, it says Armenia, but then he mentions the mountains of the Gardenians, and there's a debate. You can look on Google. There's people saying that's down in southern Turkey. There's others trying to put it in Iran. So it's just like a mix of views on that one. Let me move down to now this site called the Durupinar site, and why we are even looking at it. This criticism that Ron claimed he had found it. Well, in reality, even Ron says this, he saw a news article about it. So he didn't find this site. He was the one who promoted it later. But if you look at who really found it, it's Captain Ilhan Durupinar. He worked as a cartographer making maps for the Turkish military. So it was discovered on 9/11, 1959. And 1 week later, after he had found it, it hit the news. So this site here, I haven't read, that is the Mount Ararat range, the greater and lesser peaks. And then just 17 miles south is where the red arrow is the Durupinar site, right across the valley, still in the mountains of Ararat. In fact, in that same mountain range is a Ur-2 castle, or Ararat Castle. So, and in the valley floor, there's a whole bunch of archaeological sites by the Urartian kingdom. So this area was definitely the territory of Ur-2. But 1 week after 9/11, 1959, the Turkish newspaper put this little thing, a little blurb. It's in Turkish, but nuh'un gemisi means Noah's boat. And I had it translated once. I don't remember all, but it basically says they've seen this boat shape in a photograph in the now. And here I think they say Mount Ararat because that's by the time it hit the press, that's what they're describing. The site actually was 17 miles south, and this was the photograph that Captain Durupinar in his office in Ankara, looking, doing his job, he saw this shape and he's like, "What is this? It looks like a boat." Finally, by October, a month later, the photographs that he was looking at were published in the world press. So here's the Turkish photograph, and then we actually have copies of this magazine, October 1959, a really nice aerial photograph with the boat shape circled in white right there in the mud flow. Here's an American newspaper, Columbus, Ohio. It has the same photograph on the front page. And then, so about 1 year later, a Christian group from America got involved. They wanted to go see this site. So they showed up in June 1960, and they got connected with Captain Durupinar and the Turkish military, and they actually got permission to go see the site. And so here's a story in July of 1960, a month later after the expedition, actual ground photographs of people walking on the boat. And you can see in that the bottom, the large one on the bottom, on the left side, you can see like the shape is smooth, like a oval shape, but all around it's rough. But right in the middle is this. I have a better photograph to show you. Then September, 2 months later, it was in the American Press, September 5th issue with Hemingway on the cover. And I have a bunch of these copies. You can buy them on eBay. But in that issue is the article by Rennie Norbergen, who was on that expedition. He was an author, and he was with the rest of the group. There was an evangelist. There was actually an archaeologist. There was a couple of business people, the Turkish military, and Captain Durupinar. And so this is the American Life magazine. And this is what Ron Wyatt saw. So he found out about it, like millions of others of Americans, in 1960. And of course, at that time he was young. I think he had just started a family, and so he said he could not have gone overseas to check this out until 20 years later, basically in the late 1970s. Here are two photographs from the actual expedition. Again, you can see, you can compare, and I'll have some other ones, but you can compare what it looked like, 1960 to today, and I'll explain what the differences are. But here you can see this in this, this flow of, it looks like, like a earth flow, mud flow. Technically, I think it's an earth flow. Parts of it could be a mud flow where, it's a lot of mud, it's moving faster. But every year that changes. And this is what I want to talk about when we talk about the evidence for the boat. The boat has stayed the same shape. It has not changed or moved. But all around it, the earth flow has changed, and the soil has dropped away. Now I have this little animation of a fire there because on that 60 expedition, they were expecting, this was before Hagopian's story, but they were expecting this. Okay, this is Noah's Ark, and we have this boat shape on the ground. There has to be like petrified wood or solid things sticking out of the ground. Something. They didn't see anything. They saw dirt and rocks, and so the Turkish military, I don't know who suggested it, but they said they had dynamite. So they actually blew two holes in the side of this, trying to find, So, they went down maybe 10 feet looking for something. They didn't see anything that they thought would be petrified wood. And so they released kind of a negative statement and said, it was inconclusive. But one of the guys on the expedition, who was actually one of the two scientists, he was a photogrammetry expert from Ohio State University, Dr. Arthur Brandenberger. Now, he's famous because he helped the Kennedy administration identify the Soviet missile sites in Cuba. When they took the photographs with the U-2 spy plane, because he's a photogrammetry expert, he could spot the objects and identify what they were, these missiles in Cuba. So when he saw this, and this was his quote, that he had no doubt that this is a ship. In fact, he thought that statement they put out after the expedition was too negative. And later, this is really interesting, Captain Durupinar was interviewed by Jim Serderson, a Turkish film producer, and Jim asked him his views about that expedition, and he claimed that the official statement was very negative, but he said he saw their plans and the paperwork by the American group, the rest of the team that showed up. He said those private paperwork was all positive. I'm not positive, but they wanted to come back and do more work. They didn't want to announce that to anyone. But they put out a negative press release. He didn't like that. He thought they were trying to basically say they're not interested anymore and then sneak back in and do their own thing. Anyway, they never came back, though, the group. But Captain Durupinar never lost, he always believed it was Noah's Ark. Now, sadly, I didn't get a chance to ever meet him or talk to him, and he passed away a couple years before the pandemic. But I did meet this individual. His name is Aran Guler. He was a famous Armenian Turkish photographer, and he was famous for taking pictures of life in Istanbul. And he has a cafe there in Istanbul. We met him before he passed away in 2016. Here I am standing in the back, and then my photographer friend with him. But what was famous for him is the Turkish military had hired him the next year after the 1960 expedition to take low-flying airplane photographs of the site. So remember, the other photograph was from high altitude, the military photos that Captain Durupinar took. These, and I hadn't seen these, I first found out about this guy's name when I was looking through old newspaper articles about the Ark. Someone had, interviewed him, and he had claimed that he had found it. But actually, it was Durupinar had found it. I was like, well, who's this guy? And I looked him up, And I found some black and white photographs. And then I went after he had passed away. I went to his museum in Istanbul, and in the archives they have all his photographs he took of the boat shape. They wouldn't let me take any pictures of it, but there's some on the internet. But I could see they brought out a big monitor, and I could look through it like on site there while they watched me make sure I didn't take any pictures of the pictures. They're very controlling of this, but you can see the shape that's sitting there on the side of this mountain.
And what
And he
decade
was
was this
flying.
from?
These are 1960, so
Okay.
1961, so a year after the American expedition.
So when
He
you
was
say
hired by
the shape hasn't changed, we're talking from when to when?
from the first photographs. So the first
And
photograph was
that was when again?
1959.
Okay.
1959, yeah, and so until today, like every year, you can
So
go out there and take
so
a
all
picture.
the other area around that, we can say, because we have photographs of
Oh,
that too, we can say there was
yeah,
major
it's always
change.
moving.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, later on, I'll show you some of my drone photographs. In the next couple slides, actually. Let me actually coming right up. So what's the evidence? So that's the initial. Wow, it looks like a boat. Why do we think it's Noah's Ark? So let's talk about the shape. Like we just talked about that right now. The first thing I want to point out is that some people who've never been there have tried to explain that the shape of this is because of natural mud coming down from the mountain. It hits a rock. You've seen it in a stream. The mud builds up and it forms a shape, and then, and then it comes together. And there's the diagram right there on your screen. The problem is this is the complete opposite how fluid dynamics works. I actually had a little video I'd found on YouTube, and I forgot to put it in here, but it shows liquid like water with a dye, and they put I don't know what it was, a metal object. It's going downhill, this liquid, and you can see it going around it, and it's forming the shape on the white shape at the top. The arc shape's the opposite, so you can't say that there was a rock or boulder there and the mud built up around it and formed it, because the pointed end is uphill. So unless the mud defied gravity and went uphill, then the shape of Noah's Ark cannot be explained by. That was one of the explanations people gave, because you have to explain how to get what is this shape. So one of the explanations was, oh, it's an obstruction in a mud flow, meaning there's a rock obstructing the mud. The mud goes around it and forms the shape, and that's not what you see in nature. That they can no way create that object that way, because the pointed end is uphill, the rounded end is downhill, and the arrows there shows the direction of flow. The blue arrows at the bottom, um, and so the shape itself. And here's a animation, not an animation, but kind of taking away the deformation of the boat. It's at it right now. The boat shape is kind of angled in the mud flow because the mud has pushed it, so it's facing the west where the visitor center is. So that's the best location to take a photograph. You do have it splayed out in the middle, just like you find other ancient wooden boats. As the wood decays, it gets larger. It kind of loses its initial shape, but you still have this initial boat shape. So what was the original Noah's Ark look like? A friend in Germany took my drone photographs, and he kind of took away the deformation of the site and try to make it more parallel the lines and tilted it. So you can see what he did. I made it to a little animation, he gave me this animation. And again, when you're looking at ancient shipwrecks, exact same thing, where you have it as it decays over time, it's going to fall apart, but still you'll still see it, the boat shape. You call it Greek, Roman ships. So when you look at the shape of it, and this is what I want to talk about, like from the 1960 or 59 until now, the actual shape itself is still there. Nothing's changed about it. Same width, length, everything. Still the same boat shape. That's my drone photograph. Here's a black and white from 1961. And so back then, look how the mud is right up to like the sides of the shape, the very top edge or rim of the boat, you can call it. Here's another close up. Again, these are not high quality because some of these are from um, like scanned, bad quality images, and they won't give me the rights to actually get the 4K, whatever you want to call it, image of their slides. So, anyways, I'm just using the low res that I could freely get, but you can see people actually on it right there. And so, here's what's really interesting: if you talk to the locals, now the guy who runs the business center now, his name is Nuri. His mother was a teenager in the 1940s, and his uncle too, and they remember the initial earthquake. They said before, and let me just back out. Do we have let me find a photo that kind of shows the whole area. This one, here we go. So they said in the past, up to 1940s, the whole area was a nice smooth field. They could cut the hay, and they said that what you see now on the Ark site, the smooth, type of landscape, that was the whole area. They said 19. Now this is really interesting. Some people say the exact day that Israel was formed as a nation. Others are not too sure. We don't have exact data, but in 1948 there was an earthquake that hit the area, and everything around it kind of liquefied. And now it's what you call this mud flow or earth flow around it. Really rough terrain with crevices and boulders, but the Ark shape appeared in 1948, and so that's what you see here in Arik Güller's 1961 photograph. But the mud was right up to the edge of it, but you see the clean lines, and that's what got Durupinar's attention. Dr. Brandenberger, the photogrammetry expert, and his attention, and that's why the American group went
Mhm.
out there in 1960. Let me just go fast forward to where we were
So
at.
so you're saying the earthquake happened around 1948, and that
Yeah.
cleared away a lot of the dirt and debris to actually reveal this boat shape that maybe wouldn't have been easy to see before that?
Well, I won't say cleared away. What it did, it basically changed the terrain. So before, if you look at this photograph, the boat shape is that smooth area in the top left corner, basically, because it's from a hill looking down on it. So this is not an aerial photograph. This one, but look around it. Now at the very bottom, you can see there's a couple of horses and people, and all around it is this rough terrain. That rough terrain basically appeared with the ground basically did all that in 1948 after that earthquake. So this mountainside basically, I don't call it liquefied, but it just started. The mud moved, the dirt got all the earthquake, so all the terrain ruptured. But this area stay where the boat is, it kept its shape. That's when people first noticed that, hey, there's something different there. The locals though didn't from 58 until 1940 59, so that 10-year period. They're local Kurds. No one had iPhones back then, or there was no Twitter, no Instagram. No one's posting photographs of this thing. They just knew that in 48, the area they used to farm is no longer farmable, and now they have this shape in the middle, and it stayed that way. Now in 59, when the Turks flew their, they joined NATO in 59. So when they were mapping out their country, because they were right next to the Soviet Union, they're making these maps. That's when they first spotted this, because you had to spot it from an airplane. That's the view. So someone who saw the airplane photograph, which was Captain Durupinar, they said, "Wow, there's this boat shape that's there with these really nice streamlined lines. What is this?" Let me just go on another. So here it is again. So before 48, that whole side of the mountain was like this, very smooth. They're growing, wheat and grass, whatever, and hay. Now here's the other American photograph from the 1960 expedition. Again, you can see how rough it is outside of the arc shape, but inside, there it is, this sitting on the ground. Now, the thing I wanted to point out was, so you're in an area where there's a lot of seismic activity. Plus, it's unstable, the side of the mountain, but this shape has always been there. And so every earthquake that happens, and I've been there when there are earthquakes, like I've been in town, not at the arc site, when you could feel it shake. And it's a seismic area like California. Here's an example when Ron Wyatt, so when he first got to this site in 77, he wasn't able to go down onto it. It was a very brief trip, but he came back 2 years later because he heard about an earthquake on the news that had hit eastern Turkey. So he wanted to go see if that affected the Ark site, and sure enough, it did. When he got there, he noticed more of the soil had actually fallen away, and the boat formation had kind of like popped out of the ground. But the shape is still there. It's not like the shape is gone now. So something's holding. This is always the question for those who say, "Well, it's not Noah's Ark." Well, then what is it? Something's holding it. The integrity of the site is there because something is in the soil or below the ground that's keeping this boat formation, while all around it the soil is changing. And here's my drone photograph from 2019, compared to the 1961 Arik Güller photo. You can see, obviously now that it's popped out, there's more erosion of the shape. The size is still there. It hasn't turned into a box or fallen apart, but the edges around, because it's now out of the ground, popped up more. You get harsh winters and rainstorms, so you do have more jagged edges, but still the shape is there. But the terrain around it, again, back to this whole thing about what's going on around it, it's always moving and changing. So, and that fact
Yeah, I
is
mean,
one of our
it
papers
looks
we're
super
working.
different just looking at those two photos, it's night and day.
Yeah,
Especially
so
that right
you
hand,
can
kind of like the right hand lower side. I mean, it's nothing the same.
right hand. Yeah, yeah, that whole thing. So I'm gonna go back. That's the right hand lower. Right. So that whole area, all the dirt was up on up to the side of the boat. Here's another photo. That's the right hand side there. Let's move on to that's this section of the slides was about the shape. It's boat shape, and I didn't touch on this. The next thing people will say, oh, it's boat shape. Oh no, the ark has to be a box. The Hagopian's view, and even other people, you don't have to believe in the Hagopian story of seeing a box, the rectangular barge. People just say, oh, well, there's 3 dimensions given. It says it's an ark, so it has to be a rectangular barge. And so that's a view that's popular. So because you find a boat shape, like, no, why would it be boat shape? The ark didn't have to go anywhere. Why is there a pointed bow? And people can even look this up on like using AI, like Chat GPT. Tell Chat GPT you're a ship engineer. Then ask it to explain the difference between a barge, flat bottom, square, rectangular barge, versus a ship shape, and what would handle the open seas better. It has nothing to do with going from place A to place B. It has to do with the ability of the ship to hit for handling the waves. And so I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to argue with somebody, but you can do your own research and look up why you have a pointed bow, because when the waves are coming in, hitting the ship, if it's a barge shape, the ship will rotate and just naturally go parallel to the waves and thus be more susceptible to rolling and capsizing. Because now the waves are parallel to the ship and it'll just start, the ship will turn over. So no, God designed it. The Bible, Moses, when he wrote the description of Noah's Ark, he's very brief. He doesn't tell us where the toilets were or where did Noah slept, the cages were on the ark, or how many animals. He's very brief on the description of Noah's Ark. So just because this is a ship shape, I don't think that goes against the Bible. In fact, the word ark is used, the same word is used in the story about Moses when he was, as a baby, put in a reed ark, basically, on the Nile River. Now, I've been to Egypt many times. You go to the museums there, they have examples from the 18th dynasty, which is the time of Moses, the late Bronze Age, and before and after, of these reed baskets. People would make them for different things, storage and whatever. And there's different shapes. They're all arcs, but I have photographs. I've seen square ones, oval ones, round ones, rectangular ones, but that they're all use the same word arc. So the word arc has nothing to do with the shape of the boat. It has to do more about what it was used for and how it was to hold or protect something. It had nothing to do with it being rectangular. So that, I think we've hit that pretty good on the shape. Now, what about, Moses did write that the ark was 500 cubits long or 300 cubits long. Does it match what we see on the ground? And so here's the verse in Genesis chapter 6 for the dimensions. 300 cubits, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. So what is a cubit? And now there's different cubits. So we're going to ask which cubit. So a cubit, the journal thing people will say is that, oh, it's your tip of your finger. And so, if I'm a tall person, I'm not. But if you're a tall person, then the cubit would be really long. If you're a short person, it'll be really short. It doesn't really always work that way. In fact, during the time that Moses would have written the book of Genesis, and this is a cubit rod from the treasurer of King Tut. They found it in the guy's tomb. Based on, here's a quote from Encyclopedia Britannica. So during this time in the ancient world, the Royal Egyptian cubit was the standard of measurement, kind of like the metric system is today outside of the US or in scientific literature. You have meters, centimeters. So back then, the Royal Egyptian cubit was a set thing. And so we know exactly how long it was. It was 20.62 inches. So if you take 300 of those, you'll get how many inches the ark is. So you divide it by 12, you'll get the feet. So when you do all that measurements, and here's the verse from Acts, basically saying that Moses, being the crown prince or a prince of Egypt, he would have been educated when he grew up in the royal courts in this system. So he knew about the Royal Egyptian cubit. So when he wrote Genesis, he most likely used it. So here's the math. If you have 300 cubits long, it's 515 feet, basically. And I've been out there with tourists who brought their own measuring tapes, and we've measured the boat just on the ground, and it's from tip to tip. It's 515 feet long. I've been out there with also a guy who had a laser, more exact measurement, and so the same thing. Now, what about the height? The 30 cubits. What we're looking at is basically a decayed, buried boat. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the scans on what's below the ground, but you can't expect after 4,000 years you're going to get 51 foot height. Again, we were just not attacking, but downplaying a perfectly preserved barge on Ararat. We can't expect a perfectly preserved ship over here. So you're not going to find the height, but we're finding layers, basically saying that, hey, there's probably more stuff preserved down below the ground than we expect, or that have affected the soil. So it's showing up on our geophysical scans.
How would you measure the height of the Durupinar site?
Yeah, you can't unless you do a full excavation and then see what's left. So let's say you excavated down, you found out the hull is there, maybe part of the first that second middle deck, if the hull was the first deck, and then the middle deck, and then you have a third deck. So Moses did say there are three decks. Now, what would have been left?
Oh, so the numbers
after?
that are on the screen, that's not for the Durupinar site. That's for
No. This is the Bible. The Bible saying. So I'm just
okay, sorry.
converting the biblical cubits to something we understand today, like feet or meters. So I'm saying
Okay,
like the
gotcha.
30 cubits, we can't measure that on the Durupinar site. We can measure the 300. And then the 50, this is where it gets interesting. Some have said that if you do the average down the main part, it has pointed rounded ends. But if you take the average going down through there, it turns out to be an 85-foot average because you look at a ship shape. Others, and you can actually see this on the boat shape where it's kind of splayed out, where it's really wide. The widest point is 138 feet. So that's like almost 50 feet wider and the widest part. But you can see where it kind of bulges out on one side. And so if you look at other ancient ships, you'll see the same effect happens where a wooden vessel, as it decays over time or is buried, the rib timbers, which would have held it up when it was perfectly preserved, as they break down and decay, they fall out. And so the ship gets wider. So there's different explanations, but the actual length of it, was not dealing with the rib timbers going out. The size of this it can be a coincidence, but it is 300 Royal Egyptian cubits. Versus now, people have said, well, there's ship shapes all around the world. Well, if you find one in the mountains of Ararat that's exactly 300 cubits, we can go study it. This right now is the only one. So that, to me, everything has to fit. You can't just say, I have a ship shape. Moving on. So no one's ever excavated this site. We can talk about it more later, but basically they only have allowed non-destructive techniques. So one was metal detectors. So Ron in 1979, his first thing he did, he wanted to test the soil. And so this was great. Like other people, they used dynamite, and they had an archaeologist on that team in 1960. So Ron, give him credit. He went there and said, "Okay, what can I do that can show what's here? Is this Noah's Ark? It has to be something different about the soil." And this is something we'll talk about our recent soil test we did too this last year. So in '79, he took soil samples going down. You can almost see the crevice at the very pointed end, this black line coming down and through. That was a crevice. This was a 1984 photograph, about 6 years after the earthquake. That basically the sides fell away more. That '78 earthquake. And so in 1979, when Ron went there, that crevice was not filled in. It went all the way down the boat. He went as far as he could get deep into there and took out a fresh soil sample. He also took a control sample in the mud flow outside of the boat formation. And I don't have the slide with the soil test results, but the big thing that they showed it was the carbon. Now he just did total carbon. It was not a mix of he didn't do like inorganic versus organic, but the total carbon shows that inside had a lot more percentage wise, like 300% more carbon deep in this boat formation versus just right outside the formation itself, which you think would be the same thing if it's natural. There's like the mix, like rocks and dirt. But no, there's a difference in the carbon showing that, okay, maybe this is a once decayed wooden vessel that's affecting now the soil after all these years. I think it was like 4.7% carbon for deep inside the boat, versus outside was 1 point something. And I can send you that if you want to see it, and see even on other websites people have posted it. That was all he did. Now I would have done a lot more, but we did actually this last year do some. I should say the Turkish scientist we were with, he did it, and now that's opened up the doors to do some other things too. Because this ship, you can think how fragile a wooden vessel is. and where the technology is with archaeology, you can do a lot of microscopic type studies, chemistry, chemical studies, and then just from geology alone without having to excavate. Now, and I'll give you a lot of data. So Ron, the next thing he did was in 84 and 85, he did metal detector scans just to see if there was any type of pattern of metal inside the boat. And sure enough, there were. There was this pattern that only existed in the boat formation when he was using his metal detector. This they videoed and photographed while they're doing this. But meanwhile, just right outside the edge, into the mud flow, the rough terrain is just a jumble and random noise with the metal detectors. But inside, they're getting a pattern, a linear pattern. As you're walking down the boat, you're getting a beep and a beep and a beep, and then so they started to see what this would look like in a pattern. Today, you can probably make this digital and see it, but back then, they put rocks down and to mark every spot, and then they connected this like caution tape, construction tape, to visualize what the metal detectors were seeing with the sound. Here's more photographs. This was, I believe, 84. This was done, maybe 85. So that raises the question. The Bible talks about the ark being made of gopher wood. It doesn't mention anything else. But it's not against what the Bible says in regards to, if you find metal in the boat. The Bible doesn't say there was not metal, so it's possible there was. In fact, we do know before the flood that they were making alloys like bronze and working with iron. And this is, according to traditional chronology, or the so-called Iron Age. So obviously there was technology and systems they used before the flood that was more advanced than we give it credit for. And so Noah's Ark having metal is not a problem according to the Bible. Now, this is really interesting. This object was discovered, a friend of mine was on this tour with Ron in 1991, and 90 or 91, I think it was 91, and they found this, one of the tour group members found this laying on the side of the boat shape. They picked it up, and my friend was doing video work on that tour, and we have the video of that 91 tour on my YouTube channel. But you'll see one of the things where they're like the tourists were handling this object and they're studying it. It's like, wow, look at this! It looks like a fossilized, like some type of round object, metal object. Here are some photographs we've taken it, and then I will explain the. Like, see, like two sections. Like, there's this rock-looking thing, and then there's this metal oval shape at the top. Now, when Ron had it analyzed, they basically told him there's all these different types of metals in it, maybe forming he called it a high-tech alloy. I know I'm not in that industry, so I don't know what was the high-tech versus low-tech, but there was titanium, aluminum, so these different types of metal in it. But what's really interesting is this is not just one blob of rock. When they tested the carbon, where you think is that metal shape in the middle, versus this where maybe that would be fossilized wood, that area that you think would be the wood that this metal thing is in has a lot higher carbon content. So it's showing that there's two separate objects here. It's not just a rock. You have this, what looks like this part of a metal plate or a rivet, as he was calling it, and then it's in this fossilized, it's all fossilized. So in that sense, it's a rock, because that's what fossilization does. And that was February 1992, according to my notes. Then the next thing I want to show you is in, let's see, when was this? This was January. Well, I don't put the year. This was just, I think, 5 years ago. It was before the pandemic, though. So we used X-ray diffraction, and so they're pointing this X-ray beam is non-destructive, and you can get like really exact results for a little area. And they did different sections of it, and what they found out is the side that has the so-called rivet, this oval shape, is 2 times higher in iron than other locations outside of it. So again, suggesting that this is a metal object right there embedded, and the rest is fossilized wood, which has the higher carbon. And then here's one of the zaps with the XRD, the X-ray. You can see the spike in iron there on the left side, the FE. So another non-destructive technique. Now this was first introduced and used in Turkey on the Noah's Ark site, according to Dr. Salih Brock Tutan, the geologist that we know. He's still around today, and we were just filming him out here in Switzerland, doing a whole lecture series about all his research he's done on these sites since he started there in 1985. So he's a man with so much knowledge, so we wanted to capture it because he's getting old. But he said GPR was first introduced to Turkey and used at the Durupinar site. So what GPR is, it uses electromagnetic frequency, energy, and so these antennas are shooting us down into the ground at thousands of times a second. Then they have a bouncing off density of different objects, so it returns back to the receiver, and they can record that, and that kind of gives you an idea of things that are different densities below the ground. So you can kind of, like an X-ray machine or sonar, you can kind of get a view of what's below the soil without having to dig it up. So it's non-destructive, and they use it even in construction, like over cement, to see the rebar and the condition of the metal. So Ron went out there in 1985 and 86. I believe the first one done was 86, actually, with the radar. I remember David Fazel was involved. Dr. Solly Brock Tuton later did a complete survey. Ron did complete surveys. So back then, when you did this work, it would print out the results on thermal paper. So it's a very analog system. You can see that little printout right there. The first one they did was on 75 feet below the top pointed end, right there where the arrows are. And this is the printout. This is a copy of the printout. And the big thing that stood out, because they're basically looking for patterns below the ground. And the big thing that stood out was that you're getting, I think there was 13 or more of these patterns of reflections, they call it, below the surface. And if this was random noise, like just a mud flow with rocks here and there, you would not get this at all. And they took this data to the manufacturer, and they watched the video, they looked at the printout, and this is a guy who was the vice president of this company, who's still around, GSSI. I think they're out of New Hampshire. And so Joe Rosetta was on TV in a local news station. They interviewed him about this because they hit the news that they used this new technology. And he said, this is not a natural object. The reflections are occurring. He says it's too periodic to be a natural type interface. So he's basically saying you have this pattern of reflections showing up that you would not expect in nature. So he didn't think it was a natural object, just like random mud and rocks. So there's something now that you're seeing below the ground. Now, Ron demoed this, so this was 86. A year later, there was enough excitement and interest in the site that the Turkish government, through the help of Dr. Salih Brock Tutan, they decided to declare the site a national park, just to preserve it, and they built a visitor center above it. So in 87, this happened. Now, Ron showed up with his team, and he was invited to demonstrate this radar for the governor. They had military officials there and the press. And so he went down to the Ark, and he, at the lower end, demonstrated near the rounded end the GPR radar and how it worked. Here he's actually some photographs of actually that event. And so when they printed out the data, it showed that there's something of, I think it was about 2 feet below the ground or 18 inches or something. But close enough to the surface that you could dig it up. He pointed it out to the governor, and the governor, being the governor, said he told the Turkish soldier, dig that up. So that was you could say, the first official excavation by a non-archaeologist. And what they dug up was what Ron, the deck timber, because it was flat, horizontal below the ground, and so I thought maybe this was part of one of the deckings that was preserved, and it kind of looks like you can see the pit marks or whatever. It kind of looks like the type of petrified wood shape. So when they took it to be tested in 1987s, they actually, this time, he did check for total carbon versus inorganic, and what's left gives you organic carbon. Now, if this was like a regular rock, like basalt, which some people claim it is, you would not find organic carbon in it, because basalt comes from a volcano, and so the percentage of organic carbon in this definitely suggests that it was once living matter. So since it's a rock, it would be petrified wood. Now, Ron did have it thin sectioned, and they cut a corner weight when they were doing this. And what it showed was that you actually have layers, and on the edge of it, you see a fossilized goo that kind of seeped out. And so Ron's belief was this is kind of like plywood, where you have different layers of wood glued together to give it strength. And he believed this was one of these preserved sections of the deck that happened to be below the ground right there.
Who has that today?
I hope there's more of that. It's not in Turkey, sadly. I wish it was at the local. What happened? The governor gave it to Ron to take back the test, and then Ron, I guess he didn't bring it back, but he used it in his meetings and show people. And if this is Noah's Ark, which I believe it is, we should find a lot more of that below. Once official, more like, if they ever get to a phase where you can ask me about that at the end about the excavation status. If they get to that point, I think you'd find some interesting results based on our geophysical surveys. But one other thing Ron did, this will kind of show you the state of the site. So, you're looking at it, especially when you go there on my tours, it's covered in dirt. You have this boat shape and it's dirt, dirt rocks on it. So it's always like, what's holding it together? And so here's an example where Ron kind of shows the state of the site near the surface, where the arrow is pointed out there. That's the south east corner that pointed in. So him and Richard Reeves in 1990 got permission to shave. They sharpened, shovels, and they put them on long sticks, and they shaved this. I don't know, what is that, like 20-foot section height right there at that end of the boat, with permits. And so they took off the first couple inches. They just shaved the whole thing off, just to get rid of the outside dirt and weathering, just to see what it showed there. And this is what. And then they took a photograph after they were done. They videoed the whole process while they're doing it. So people can say they carved it or whatever, but it shows these striations on this edge of the boat. And I'll highlight it there for you. You can go back. So, but those are not solid rock or like fossilized wood. That's the soil color difference. Again, so what it's showing is that as this site decayed, some things were just decayed in place and affected the color of the soil. So you had like fragments, and sadly, I don't think he ever like tested the white versus the dark. And if I show you this next photo, you'll see today. This is a drone photograph I took 2019, I think, or 2020, and it's the same section where Ron was. But there's in a certain time of day, you can kind of see the white still there, even though it's been weathered, 20 years now. I don't know, 30 years actually. This is 1990, now it's 2025. So this area, though, I was thinking, hey, we get permits, let's do it. Let's shave that again. Let's see those dark and light areas, and let's test it. Like, why is there a difference versus just saying, here's the photograph. So again, that the reason why I want to point this out is that it's basically showing the state of the site. So we're looking at like chemical testing, chemistry, So the one thing that the Turkish scientist has noticed, and this is Dr. Salih Burak Tutan, who we were working with, is that the site has harder dirt. Because again, we talked about what's keeping the site together. The soil all around it's moving and changing every year. This site doesn't change, and even just walking on it, you'll notice that it's harder dirt. So something in the chemical makeup of the soil is different from around it. And so this is a test that he is planning on doing, or he's even gotten samples already for it. I don't think he's tested yet. But again, we're talking about why is there this shape, and what's the state of preservation of things underneath the soil. Like here, Ron shaved off the soil, and you're seeing like the color differences, but that's not a solid like rib timber of a boat. That's not a solid petrified wood. That's just the fragments of dirt, but different color. And you can see the pattern there. So again, it needs to be very carefully studied versus just digging a hole into it, like what they blew it up with dynamite. Actually, right here on the side, they did that in 1960. Now, when we talk about this whole area, we'll jump back into the actual site again. But I want to cover in fossils. In fact, I'll show you a photograph soon of a fossilized snail I found actually on the ship. But around it, you see these fossils embedded in the rocks. And this is, again, we talked about sedimentary rock and how this is not a volcanic area. This is across from Ararat, and it matches the type of rock layers you expect the land in that ICR was saying the other Western Ridge has. This has the exact same rock types over here with the limestone and other sedimentary rocks laid down by the flood. Now, what's really cool about these fossils you're finding around the Ark site is that some of them are not fossilized. They're embedded in rock, but they're still the seashell. And so you can see there this really beautiful seashell that's embedded, but it hasn't turned to stone. It's actually the shell. They have what we call in the United States, those sand dollars. There's a lot of beautiful ones that are embedded, but you can't take out. But some have fallen down on the ground, so we've collected those. And some of these are in the visitor center for people to see. But here's this fossilized snail that had found on the ship. Now, here's some cool pieces. The shepherds in that area, they're mainly kids, and they go all over there with their sheep. We're very close to the Iranian border, so they get to areas like as a tourist you're not allowed to go. And when we started finding fossils, I told these shepherd kids, I said, hey, go up there. If you find any fossil, bring them down. I'll give you some money. And so sure enough, they were able to bring down some really nice pieces of fossilized coral that's in this, right below the limestone layer, or just laying out in the dirt. Some of these we just, you can tell we just like pick it up off the ground. Very nice samples. Now, moving on to like how we again talk about this a little bit, but I want to really hit home this how boats decay, because everyone has this view that it has to be this preserved boat embedded in the glacier in Ararat. Well, let's look at some ancient boats, wooden boats, and how they have decayed over time. If you go to Israel, you have to see the Sea of Galilee boat. This is actually from the first century, the time of Christ, and this was buried in the mud, and now it's in a museum by the Sea of Galilee. But they excavated it 1986. It was discovered. So at the same time Ron was working on the Noah's Ark site, this boat was found in the mud on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and they dated it based on the pottery around it and the nails between 50 BC and 50 AD. If you think of the life of Christ, that's right when he was living. And so this boat could have been, in that 100-year period, could have been floating around. Maybe even Peter used it. Who knows? But you can see what's left of it. And it's really, really fascinating how the mud preserved the hull, and they have a really good display and types of wood used. They've studied it, but it's on a museum by the Sea of Galilee, so you have to see that. The other one, which I want to talk about, these are black and white photographs, but this is the Sutton Hoo Viking burial ship that was discovered in 1930s, right before World War II, and they excavated it starting in 38 and 39. Now, Netflix actually made a whole film about the discovery of this ship, movie. So they reenacted the discovery and all the politics and the pre-war, state of things that were going on in the UK. But what they found on this ship was that everything had decayed away, but it left the shape of it. And some have claimed that maybe this is what we'll find if we ever to excavate down to the bottom of the Durupinar site, is the shape of the hull. Now, what's interesting, in this excavation they did, they literally found thousands of rivets still in place, iron, and they have a number of these in the British Museum, plus the jewelry and gold and things they found, because it was a burial ship. So it wasn't meant to be floated on water, but they buried the Viking chief in it, and they buried the boat, and then it decayed away, and then the archaeologists found it. So, but this was a wooden ship, and so this is what they found. The state of the ship was just the form of it, but they found all these rivets. Here are some of the rivets right there, and we talked about that fossilized rivet that Ron had discovered. It's possibly the same type of use, like how they used it over here to connect the wood together. And so here we have it in the Sutton Hoo boat. Now, when Ron passed away in 1999, nothing really was done about the Durupinar site. People started doing tours out here. Now, my first trip was 97, and then I came back in 2000, and that's when I met Dr. Solly Brock-Touton, the geologist who had started the work. And basically, the Turkish government told him, being the geologist for this area, to see what the foreigners were doing and report back. And he then started his own studies. So I consider him, like, for people who are alive today, like the expert, to be the expert on this, the geology of this site. He believes it's like 80 to 90% Noah's Ark. He says we need to do more studies, but he said, what else could it be? Basically, none of the work that's done so far, the GPR, the soil sampling, the core drilling that we'll talk about in a bit, that Baumgartner did, nothing disproves it's Noah's Ark. But the shape and size and length and all that. So. But you don't find a sign that says "Made by Noah and his sons." But you think about it from a believer's point of view. Well, you have the shape of Noah's Ark in the mountains of Ararat. What else could it be? And he believes it's man-made. Up until 2014, the boat just sat there, the site. They even let the visitor center decay, and it was when I was there in 2000, it was just nothing inside, a couple tables. 2014, an acquaintance of mine got permits through another friend or acquaintance in Turkey to get this permit to do geophysical survey work, brand new work using updated technology called ERT, which is electrical resistivity tomography, which is basically mapping out the resistive nature, what's below the ground, using electricity. So it has this long cable. It has the photographs I'll show you, but basically there's a long cable. You connect it to different pins, steel pins that are shoved into the ground, and the whole cable is connected to a power source, like a car battery, since you're out in the field. And then that's also then connected to a computer or central processing place, and all the data is recorded onto a chip. And then you can analyze it later on software on your laptop or whatever. So it shoots all this current through the soil. And so you have, like, let's say, 100-foot long line, and you have an even set of pins on every side to the middle. And so every pin, you're firing it, and the software is doing this. So it's firing the signals down at the same time or different times, and then it analyzes how fast the electrical signal is returned, basically kind of like radar, but use electrical resistivity. So if it's an air pocket, electricity will go through that, might like not at all, or very slowly. But if it's water or gold, it was very conductive. So electricity will go a lot faster through there, or moist soil or rock type. So again, this is a way to visualize below the ground the different layers based on the properties of being resistive or not resistive to electricity. So this guy from New Zealand, John Larson, he wanted to do this for Noah's Ark. It's used in archaeological sites. Here's a site in England where they used resistivity, and it basically mapped out the streets and designs of a buried city, and archaeologists could then reconstruct it with here's an artistic reconstruction of this Middle Ages site called Old Sarum in the UK. So in October 2014, I was there with a camera crew. We videoed the work done by John Larson of New Zealand. And then he put out the scan results on his website, which for some reason is down right now. But it says that they're being updated or something. But it's noahsarkscans.nz. That's his website. Now our website's very similar, noahsarkscans.com. On the NZ side, though, I went there yesterday, and even I think this morning it was down. But he had these images up on his website, so I'm putting them here on the slideshow. So his results were showing this. Again, this is going much deeper than Ron Wyatt in his radar. Radar with Ron, I think they got down to maybe 20 feet or less than 20 feet below the surface. That's the depth. Now, metal detector, like what he's doing with the metal detector scans, seeing the metal pattern, maybe you can get down for a foot or two. So you can see these different technologies. You can go different depths. And so ERT, the longer your cable, the deeper you can go on the side of a mountain. And so he wanted a cable that was longer than the Ark, because the Ark is 515 feet long. He wanted a cable because he wanted to do this test of the survey across the whole boat. So he had to get a cable much longer to bring from New Zealand. So he got one that was like 550 feet, I think, long, the cable, or 150 meters or something, I forget. But anyways, it went far to the mountainside, deep into the mountainside. And what he was showing, these are his results, but he was showing this ship-shaped hull below the ground, something that we never considered. Ron thought the ship was a lot shallower, what was preserved, because his radar only went certain feet down. So he thought, okay, the rest of it was just the mountain. John Larson's data was showing something that was more preserved below the surface. Here's a side slice of his data. So that area in the middle, basically the Durupinar site, they're that red or purple, whatever you call it. And then the blue outside is the mud flow, the mud and dirt around it. And this is in the middle, kind of like, this is a cross-section slice going through it. The other thing that was really interesting was that on this area right here, that yellow line is basically where they had dropped this cable. And I went way past the boat, but I just drew it kind of right there, and where the arrow is pointing down. Now, when you're doing this scan, you have to, put these steel pins, and depending on how you space it, that depends on what you're going to get back for your survey. So I believe that they were putting the pins every meter or 2 meters, about 3 to 6 feet. They're putting in these steel pins. Well, a friend that was helping him on this, and this guy told me later that, and even John told me, that they were trying to put these pins in, every 3 or 6 feet up on this 20-foot drop. And they're hitting something very solid within about 2 inches depth of the soil. And it was 20 feet high, 2 inches in, and about a foot wide was this solid thing that they couldn't get the steel pins in. And then they finally had to move it over the pins to push them in to do the survey. They didn't know what they didn't have a permit to excavate, so they just know they couldn't put the pins in. When they got the results back though for that slice there for that area, it was showing that the radar, not the radar, the ERT results was showing there's something solid below the surface right there, a vertical that's solid, not like the other location on the boat where Ron shaved away and everything's like particles. This one was something solid. Again, so the theory would be, well, maybe this is a rib to a ship, or it could just be a weird rock that's 20 feet high, 1 foot thick, going up and down. At any rate, there's something there that's interesting. So this is a reconstruction, basically going back, like if this was the ribs to a ship, that maybe it's preserved over here in this area. Again, this is the site that you pointed out how the dirt was all the way up, and then after that earthquake, it fell away. So that was kind of it wasn't exposed until 1978 or so. That whole side was covered up where we're doing this.
Well,
That's
even that scan on one of the previous slides, I mean, you can clearly see a hole. The one before that, yeah. I mean, that's, to me, I'm not an expert, but I mean, that's pretty compelling. No, I mean,
I
what
call
else
it the
could
beast
that
whale.
be? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, what would a
you don't
skeptic
expect
say?
that,
What else
right?
could that possibly be? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
if you scan the ground, you're not going to come up with that, right?
No, exactly. So again, you have to. It's always down to the question is, what is this shape? What is this object? So something's keeping it together, and we believe it's the buried remains of Noah's Ark. And there's more. We're not done yet. I'm almost done with the slides, but I'll quickly go through this. So now Ron did GPR, and John Baumgartner, a creationist, worked with Dr. Sally Brock-Touton. And so Dr. John Baumgartner is a geophysicist. I think he's retired now, but he's still alive. But they did all this GPR work in the 80s with these analog devices. Now the GPR is all digital. So it creates this point cloud of data. You can make a model, you can slice and dice it. And so we wanted to redo it. And so, and this is a whole other story we can go into, but God opened the doors that within 3 weeks, we had the funding, the permits, the team to bring them out there in October 2019, a team from America to do GPR work. And it happened to time it, exact time that that was already planned for the Science Channel to come out to film about Noah's Ark. Like God knew exactly how to fit everything together because the Science Channel was there with their crew. We got really interesting results for them to film. And the weather was perfect. Everything. In fact, the day they start, like the week before they started, it was raining, and it was bad weather. Then the week they showed up, there's stunning blue skies, not a cloud in sight. You could see into Armenia from the area we were standing on the boat. And then the day they stopped, I remember it was a Thursday evening. They had finished all the scans. Friday, they were leaving Saturday. Friday was kind of like a touring day, so we took them to like an Urartu castle and different things like that. That day it rained. So like in between the storms, God had the perfect days set up for the Science Channel and especially for the GPR, which doesn't work well in rain. In fact, you get bad results. So that was really good. But on this trip, we brought in, this is Jim Sertison. He's the one who made the Turkish documentary film about Noah's Ark and how the Turks had found it. So he's a Turkish guy. So he interviewed Durupinar, Captain Durupinar, and Ara Güler. His film is in Turkish and it has English subtitles, but very fascinating hearing from these people way back in the 60s who had worked on this and discovered the site. Now that is his daughter, Durupinar's daughter. Now I forgot her name, but anyway, she's a really nice lady. And she was there being interviewed by the Science Channel. Here's our team. Here's some of the crew that they had hired from England. Now they were agnostic or atheist. The film crew, most people working in Hollywood are, but these guys, these European guys, they could care less. They're hired for a job. But on that trip, we had seen parallel lines about 9 feet down. I don't think I have a slide for that. But it just so happens that the guy was using his phone, who was helping the GPR expert pull the radar on the Ark. And the guy was like, hey, let's look at the data. We're finding this one spot on the boat. Let me go back to, I hate to do this, but this area here, like basically to the left of that red arrow, where it kind of dips down on that left side of the boat from, and I had asked them to do a zigzag pattern, get really good data. And so they're doing it, and they come back, and they say, hey, we found something that about 8 or 9 feet down is showing up right there live on the radar screen. and they had the printout. The guy even made a video with his iPhone as they discovered it. And so that got the Science Channel really excited. So then they set up these interviews in the visitor center of the radar people. And in fact, the guy who did LiDAR, because we did radar, we did LiDAR, which uses lasers to give us a very exact centimeter level resolution topography of the site. So you can make a 3D model basically and see how things are changing. We got 500 million points. He did this terrestrial LiDAR survey. So it has this machine that just twirls like this, and it shoots out 500 million points of lasers. It records it, and then you can create a 3D model. And so that guy, he said, "Hey, I'm an atheist, but I'm here for the job," and they're all professionals. So people cannot tell us that we were like hiring a bunch of Christians and they've like falsified the data, because these are, and the whole trip was very interesting what they had found. So let me get back to where I was going with that. So these guys, the Science Channel, they were so excited to hear that they're seeing these patterns below the surface. About in this area, it was about 8 to 9 feet down. That this man, who was the producer, he called he said it was his grandmother, and who was a believer, and he said she was so excited to hear that because he told her, "Hey, I'm working on what probably is Noah's Ark. We found evidence that this is this is not natural," and whatever. I don't know what all he said, but he told us the next day that he was so excited that he told his grandmother. He called her up from Turkey. Here is what it's a little animation. So this is the combination of the LiDAR data. Again, it's not cleaned up. So, LiDAR, that 500 million points, the survey will put it all together. So you have the shape of the topography of the ground. And then below it, the colored stuff, that's the radar. And I'll show you the results for that. But this data, you can even see the people, because we had people working. We had to do multiple things at the same time because we only had 4 days. So people were standing on the boat while the guy was doing the rate and the LiDAR. So you see little figures of people in the survey results. But that right there's one of the data sets. We used 2 different antennas. So we were able to get different depths. And we got down to the deepest, I think, was 20 feet, 22 feet down, about 7 meters. So really good depth with one of the antennas. And this is where after the trip, so, we hired this random team, and I didn't go through all the details of how we met them, but they came out and got this data. Some stuff we saw on site that the Science Channel got excited about. They were excited to film and all that. But later, we for the full results, we had to submit it to someone who can interpret it. And so we submitted it to a guy who, again, had nothing to do with Ron Wyatt or our site, but we paid him. He was a consultant who trains archaeologists in America how to use GPR, how to use radar. So he's an expert, plus he's an archaeologist himself in Atlanta, Georgia. He analyzed the results, and he pulled out something really interesting. And this area, this is what I'm talking about, 7 meters down, 20 feet or so, with one of our antennas, he found right angles. And in this area, he said, look, this is not natural. This possibly could be man-made, I should say. He said if he was to do an excavation, this would be the spot he would start. Because this usually when something like these right angles all stacked up like that, and it's not just a surface feature. I mean, it's not like 1 centimeter thick. These right angles have depth, and I'll show you a video clip of that. Again, here's the layout of this initial angular structure we're seeing below the ground, where it's at on the Durupinar site. So that's the north bottom area. So that's northwest corner. Here's a little animation of them analyzing this point cloud data. So all these little points are from the radar unit. And as he's slicing through it, you can see that this angular data, look at the orange and the red, is a little structure at depth, which again, he got excited about, saying, hey, this is not natural to him. He would excavate to see what it is. It's a really good target to look at. It's about 7 meters down, 20 feet. Here I stacked up a bunch of our photographs from our Guler's 1961, low-flying airplane photo, my drone photograph in 2019, and then overlay that the GPR scans that shows this angular area, the orange and red areas down there on top of it from an October 2019 survey. So now let's fast forward. So that was it. The radar that we did in 2019, It was a miracle to get done, but we wanted to get more. Like we have the raw data, and we wanted to get it reanalyzed to get more out of it. Say, hey, what else can we find? We have this data. We got it was a small report from the guy, but I wanted more out of it. I was like, okay, let's see what else. So I asked Dr. Sally, do you know somebody who's an expert in GPR who could take a look at this? And he said, I know. He said he claims one of the best expert in the world. This lady from Connecticut who has 40 years experience. He said, send it to her. He had talked to her, and she was willing to do this for free as a side project. So in 2022, or in the summer of 20, I heard the data. And about 6 months later, I did a Zoom call with her. She said, hey, I don't know, because again, she had nothing to do with Ron Wyatt or the Noah's Ark search or anything. But she said, did you guys dig a tunnle down there? Is there a utility line? I was like, no, this is the middle of a mud flow, maybe a field way back. But, this is a side of a mountain. She says, well, there is a tunnel that I'm seeing that if you hunch down, you can even walk through it. It's not even filled in. It's it's an air pocket, but it's about 4 to 6 meters down, and it has some depth, like maybe 2 meters of depth, so which is about 6 feet or so, or 1.5 meters of depth of height, I should say, of an air pocket, and it goes from the top end, the pointed end of the boat, all the way down to the midsection near where the big rock is. And then she said, right there, she's showing this, what I call a central chamber or atrium. She was calling it a void, like a cavity, of a big air pocket that is squarish in shape or rectangle. And it goes from there all the way, like deeper, all the way down to about the end of our data for this results was about 12.5 meters. So you times it by 3.3 to get your feet. So you're looking at 30 plus feet. So this whole open area going down below the central rock, I kind of overlaid it, but I'm going to show you the results after I'm talking about it. Here are the images. Now these are slices, so we have a whole bunch of these slices. In fact, I combined them all for something else we're doing to make a 3D model that will show this pocket, what I call the central hallway. So that's the red you're seeing down there. On the middle, the blue is the boat shape. That's the radar data we have. We did radar outside the ship. And in this reanalysis that she did, she is finding this central corridor tunnel that is, not full of water or full of mud, and that parts of it, she said you could walk through. It's going all the way down to the middle, and it hooks up with. If you look on the right side of the screen. That deep red area, and this is just one slice, and I think this is the bottom slice. This is 13.5 meters. So from there up, we have more and more slices, showing that this central void goes all the way up to the end of where this hallway or central corridor is, which is about, let's see, that one is at 6.5 meters. So you have just right here, 6 meters height of this central hole in the ground void. So you're looking at 20 some 18, if it's 6 meters, 18, 19 feet.
And it looks like a hallway going right down the middle, where you could imagine if that was like a middle walking area and you had potentially cages for animals off each side. I mean, I'm just using my imagination,
so
but am I on the right track?
What's interesting. You are, and in fact, you're seeing portions of one inside the in the inner, the left side. You see, there's like double. I'm pointing, but you can't see where I'm pointing. But you see some of that red. There's another line that kind of follows the edge of the ship now, and so some of the scan layers you actually see more of it, and then there's a void at the very end of the pointed end. So this is kind of upside down. The pointed end is the bottom of the scan for the pointed end of the ship. And at the bottom there, you see there's a red blob. So even there's like an open space suggesting like, okay, at the end, like where the hull ship meets, it's just a big open area. Maybe they had storage or something, assuming it's Noah's Ark. And then this central tunnel or hallway goes all the way down this way. And maybe there was 2 side tunnels. Now, the right side of that image is all this blue. Like there's one red dot, but basically it looks like that whole area had filled in. Like there's nothing remaining of the ark there. But you are seeing
even on the image to the right, you have that I guess a central area that I'm just using my imagination here. Maybe it could be like a stairway or something connecting the three. There was three levels in the ark, right?
So if you go to the Kentucky Ark, their model, which is almost the same size as this one, their model is 500 feet long. They have a central, they want to call it atrium. So basically, it's an open space area between all the decks. So it lets in light, fresh air to circulate. And so maybe that's what this is. Plus, or the stairway, ramp system, something that will get the access to the different levels and provide fresh air or whatever to circulate around. So when you look at all this data, what's interesting now, this is the Ron Wyatt drawing that he would show in all his presentations and in his, I think, his Noah's Ark book. So he thought the remains was much shallower, and that where his radar was seen, he thought that was the hull. And you can see the feet measurements there on the top part of that diagram. 12, 16 feet. The middle part was kind of where the rock is. He put down 25 feet, and he was getting these measurements not just from the GPR, but what he said, he claimed that when that earthquake opened up and he got his soil test in 1979, he said he could look down in there because the crack was really deep, and he could see these preserved timbers, like there's structure down below that deep. I don't know, there's no photographs and again, it's one of these stories, but then the radar he was getting was showing that there's something at this level. He assumed it was the hull, and that everything above it was decayed. But now with the ERT scan, our really deep GPR scans, what's looking like is not the hull, but the middle decking has a lot of interesting features. And so probably the top deck is gone, the roof is gone, but there's a middle area that's really that's preserved, and then below that is the hull itself, where we're getting this central void atrium going all the way down, and then going down to the area of the depth that the John Larson survey is showing, what I call the beached whale, that hull shape. Now, this is the last part of the slides about last year's soil test. So when you're looking at the Ark, excavations have always been off the table for now. So non-destructive work like soil testing can be done. Here's Dr. Sally Brock Teuton. Last year, I was doing drone work. I love photographing the site, and he wants me to take pictures of the whole mountainside for his geological studies. And when I was photographing it, I noticed this was in September of last year, I think. And here's, especially in this photo, you can really see it. This is our tour group at the end of September. And on this group, we had a guy from Australia, him and his wife right there in the middle. He's a soil scientist, and he teaches farmers mainly about how to take care of their soil. And anyways, his name is Bill. And so Dr. Saleh was there, and they got along quite well because, Saleh is a geologist. But what I had asked Saleh, I said, hey, there's something I just noticed about the Ark this season. Maybe it's every season's this way, but inside of the boat shape, and the red arrow is pointing out, it's yellow and a different color than the grass growing just right outside the same area, but just on the other side of the ship shape. So if this was just all the same type of matrix and soil, there's something going on that's different inside there that's suggesting that it's not. That this is different, like the chemical breakdown or whatever's in there is affecting the color of the grass. So, and Bill was noticing it, and so he designed with Sally this whole soil survey to do, and Sally went and took 22 samples for that first initial trip survey back there at the end of September of last year, and the results. And again, we have not. Sally himself has not even had time to analyze this, but I kept bugging him. I said, "Please send this to me." So he sent me the initial. This is just one of the papers that shows the different elements for the 22 samples, and then he also we have another one that shows like pH and the organic material for each one of those sites. So 6 of the sites at each site we took 2 samples. 6 of them was these sites were inside the boat formation, and 6 were outside. Of those 6 that were outside, 5 of them were close, just right outside the border of the boat, around it, and then 1 was higher, further up the mud flow, higher up the mountainside. What the initial results are shown, and we haven't had time to sit down and go through it all. And then I fed all of this through a couple of AI systems like Gemini and ChatGPT, and even I think DeepSeek. Grok. I used the Elon Musk one. So in fact, I was every time they do an update, I feed it again and see if it finds something interesting. The one thing that the difference is that um, the organic material inside the boat is much more. There's a higher percentage of organics, way higher, suggesting that whatever's in this area of the boat shape. And I didn't even mention, like, when I'm feeding it through, AI, you can get false positive. It can make up stuff too. I didn't say anything about Noah's Ark. I just said, hey, find the differences between these group of soil samples, and then I also asked it about the color differences of the grass. Like, based on these samples, why would the grass inside have yellow? And so it was, giving me different answers. And then at the end, I said, well, if this site was an ancient boat that's wooden and buried and decaying for 5,000 years, what would in these results show that theory is correct? And then it started mentioning, well, if this is a decaying boat, that would maybe explain why you have so much more organic material in the inside of the boat formation versus right outside of it. The soil is way less. And then also talks about the pH level. But since I'm not a geologist and we have not written this up, I'm just saying that we did this test. This is the first one that I know of. I don't think anyone else has ever done a test since Ron did his, very limited test in 1979. I don't know why no one's done this, but it might give us basically direction to do more, because Dr. Salih Raktutan wants to also do this. There's a type of test where you can determine the hardness of the soil. There's a machine to use for that. And then he was just here, as I mentioned earlier. He was here in Switzerland. We were filming him for 4 days. And during that time, we also went over more of the new analysis that's showing the corridors. And he had not really looked at it, even though this was done 2 years ago, in 2023. A year and a half ago, we got the data. And I told him, and he was excited, but I think because he's getting older, he forgot or something. But we showed it to him again, and we were recording the interaction with him on camera. And now he's so excited, he even suggested it, not me, to do core drilling. Because you can't excavate still because it's so fragile the site, and the Turks just won't allow it. But core drill with a hole that can go down 60 feet, 100 feet, you can get a whole core of data. And when he saw those corridors, he was even saying, "Oh, we can stick a camera down. We can go to those right angles, see what those right angles are. Get the right core." And so there's hopefully things we can do this summer.
Because in other words, you have that whole open area. So if you just drill down, you could stick a camera, and supposedly it would be a whole open area in there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, basically, we have this lady's interpretation of the data. Now let's go. We have to ground truth it. Let's see what it is. So she's saying these are open voids. Let's put a camera down in there and see what they are. The other guy was saying he found right angles. Let's see what those right angles are. Are they preserved, petrified, the walls of a room? Are they just the rocks down there that happen to be right angles?
Is the government going to allow that?
Well, we're looking at right now. It's February, so March coming up. We're hoping. Salih is working. He's the guy. He's a retired professor of geology, but he's the man who'd have to get it done. So we fund him. Plus, we keep every week. How's it going? Giving up updates and pushing them on. So,
because the locals, I would imagine, are all Muslim, so you would think that they also would be incentivized sort of to find this, right? I mean, it would be super special to them as well.
Exactly. The Quran doesn't mention Noah. The Quran is full of different snippets of stories from the Bible. So you do have their version of the Noah's flood in the Quran, and so they do believe, and Noah's a prophet to them. And Salih's a believer. Turkey is a secular Muslim country, so people can believe what they want. You have a minority of Christians there, but if you talk to the younger generation, they are like the Kurds and Muslims I talk to, or I say Kurds and Turks. The younger generation, they don't go to mosque, they don't pray 5 times a day. They say a lot of them say they're agnostic. So you have the same things going on in like the Christian church in the West or in Europe. Just people, they're name only, like, okay, I'm Muslim because that's my family tradition, but I don't practice it, or I don't even believe in God, they'll say. So you have scientists the same way, where they're secular scientists, so they're not going to put their name down looking for Noah's Ark, like ruin their career. So that goes back to the whole question of why hasn't anyone excavated it. Well, number one, you need This is in Turkey, so you have to have a Turkish university involved, Turkish professor of archaeology. Find me one that'd be interested in excavating Noah's Ark. They'll want to put their name down for that, and then find the funding for it. So it's very difficult. Now, Salih, who's a geologist with also areas of expertise in sedimentology and other areas of geology, and he's worked with archaeologists too, and the geophysicists doing these surveys. So he has a broad area of expertise, and he's been studying the site since '85. When at that time there was a military government in Turkey. They had a coup, and so the military got involved because they wanted to check out what all these foreigners coming out here, like Ron Wyatt and Fazal and the astronaut Jim Irwin. And so he was involved in kind of checking out all the groups and telling the military, officials like who should continue working, who shouldn't, and all that. But I just want to mention this quote right here. Now, Dr. Erkam Arkagal was the founder of Turkish archaeology. And so he trained, basically he's known as the professor of professors or whatever, because he's trained like the current professors out there in the universities, because he was the first one in Turkey to start up archaeology. And so he's well known. Now, Ron Wyatt met him in 1985, March of 85. And they went to his home, and he reviewed this is the very initial data. Ron, I don't know if he showed him the soil test from '79 or the metal detector scans, and then the photographs, so the ship shape. And this guy right away could see there was a ship, and they say he was atheist, but he basically said at any rate, because again he can't say it's Noah's Ark, but he said it's a ship, it must be preserved. So it comes down to, well, what other ship could it be? That's how they frame it. But he wanted it preserved, and so we always show people today. We tell the Turks today who are in control, the governor or the archaeologist, hey, this guy said in '85, it's just sitting on the side of the mountain in the rain, and it's more work should be done. And there are plans that like Dr. Sully has come up to how to divert the water away to keep water from going into the site and seeping in, to stabilize the area with different methods like trees. Now I am so sorry. I removed the wrong slide, or I was supposed to replace this one. Because again, part of this presentation was using the German church a couple weeks ago, and so now this is all in German. But this is Salih in his quote. I will have to give you. You know what? I have it actually in my notes what he says here. I'll just read it. He says, "The facts speak for themselves. We have a boat-shaped object at an elevation of 2,000 meters that did not occur naturally. We haven't found anything that refutes the possibility of this being Noah's Ark. We can see signs of specific structures in our scanning that are not naturally occurring." Now, that quote was in 2000. So now, this is before the 2014 scans, the 2019 scans, the Turkish 2021 scans, last year's soil tests. So yeah, there's a lot more data to consider. But even in 2000, Dr. Salih believed that there's nothing so far that they've found to disprove that it's a man-made object. I'll end with this. If you have any questions, this is one of my favorite drone photographs. It shows our site compared to where Ararat is, the actual peak of Ararat. So again, very beautiful area. So if anyone wants to come out there, check out our website. We have also all this, a lot of these photographs and the different reports I mentioned, pro and con against the site, are on our website. So you can download these different PDF reports. And also stuff I mentioned about Mount Ararat, the different studies like the glacier study and all that. That's all linked on the website.
Well, Andrew, I really appreciate you coming on to have this discussion with us. It's really fascinating stuff to consider, and the timing of it really is just so incredible, with so many fascinating biblical themes coming to pass in our lifetimes. Everything going on in Israel, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, and we talked about the incredible connection with 1948. I mean, it's sort of too much to ignore, and all these discoveries that people are starting to now become exposed to, even the Red Sea crossing, the true site of Mount Sinai, and now you got this Durupinar site. You can consider that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what information is going to come out over the next couple of years. So, really a fascinating thing to continue to watch and see what happens. but really just an incredible time also to be alive where so many of these things are finally coming to light. So for us to continue to watch your work and follow you and support you, why don't you again just remind people what's your website, what's your YouTube, or the best way to keep in contact with you?
Our YouTube channel, which we now almost 325,000 subscribers. It's at Discovered Media. So you look up Discovered Media on YouTube, you'll find us. The website for the Noah's Ark research and tours and to contact us, go to noahsarkscans.com, noahsarkscans.com. And also it's linked to on the YouTube channel. You can get to the website that way, and vice versa. We link to our YouTube from the website. And yeah, there's a contact page there. There's tour information. There's all the research reports. And we do a lot of posts on Facebook too. We have a Facebook group and Facebook page and Instagram, of course. But we keep YouTube pretty much updated if we're doing something we want publicly released. And we also do that different posts on the Facebook page and group. So people, if they're on any of those platforms, they can look us up, Discovered Media, or go to the website.
Well, thanks again, Andrew. Really appreciate it. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.